What's going on, Tamers? It is me, East the Broke. Why, you ask? Well, I didn't believe that Royal Knights was going to be a great deck before the Royal Knights set dropped over here in Japan. And, well, after seeing this week's results, I went out and bought 4 copies of each of the secret rares for the set because they're both used in the deck. So, here we are. Now, with that foreshadowing out the way, the BT13 set versus Royal Knights did release last week here in Japan, and since then we've had a ton of events, almost 80 events to pull data from, and with almost every deck imaginable getting support from this set, the results so far have been really cool to watch. So without further ado, let's take a look at the results from the last week, a couple key takeaways, as well as some of the decks that topped over the course of the events here. So looking at the results from the past week, I think that to no one's surprise, Shine Greymon is at the top. If you had looked at Shine Greymon's cards before the set release, it was pretty obvious that this deck was going to be very, very strong. With the inclusion of the burst cards as well, Shine Greymon and the new Marcus Tamer are pretty cracked. What is more surprising though is that Royal Knights has been a big winner over the course of this past week. Now, Royal Knights was the deck that when people took a look at the cards coming out, they said, well, this deck seems a little too slow, it seems a little too clunky, it has some really obvious weaknesses in things like Psychemon or Pomomon, but despite all of that, the deck has found a way to manage those things and still find a ton of wins over the course of the past week. As we move down the list, we see Bylzamon still retaining its dominance in the meta, where I thought initially that maybe this deck was only doing really well because of the purple-only cups that were happening here in Japan. The Japan Nationals definitely shook that idea to its very core, with that deck performing incredibly well. If you're interested in the Japan Nationals, I did an entire review of all the stream matches they had for that over on the channel, where you guys can watch along and take a look at some of the plays and the decks that were represented there as well. But outside of that, I think that to nobody's surprise, War Greymon is still doing very well, but a sleeper deck that has creeped up out of nowhere is Belphemon. Belphemon was a deck that I certainly didn't have on my radar, and before the set release, I don't think anybody else I had talked to had this deck on their radar either. When you put all of the pieces together, it is a well-oiled machine. Most of the deck finds cycle to find your pieces and then sink Gizmon into the trash. The level 6 Belphemon sleep mode has really good flexibility in either being played or being digivolved off your Ostamon for very low cost. The Belphemon rage mode has incredible clear potential and also finds a way to eat 4 security at 17k in a single turn. When you put all these things together, it makes for one hell of a deck. And then to round out things past the top 5 here, you'll notice that a lot of decks from before are starting to see a resurgence. Things like Crossheart are doing well. Alphamon comes out of nowhere, Dugmon pops back up. We've also got a couple of new decks and things like the Kintarosmon, as well as the Rosemon, which also received a burst card in Rosemon burst mode, as well as things like the Chessmon, which is kind of a surprise pick to me. People found a way to make Leopardmon work outside of Royal Knights, which is really interesting, as well as things like Angoramon, which got a little bit of support this set as well. A deck that's not seen here that I'm really surprised I haven't seen so far that's gotten great support has actually been Jesmon. Jesmon was the deck that got access to a new level 5, which means it doesn't have to have that choke point of trying to find your level 5s and dig them out of the deck as fast as possible. Now with as many level 5s as you need for the deck, I'd imagine it's much more consistent. So I expect to see that deck also top within the next coming weeks. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. When a Jesmon list tops, we'll definitely take a look at the list there. But for now, let's take a closer look at some of the lists that topped over this week. So the first list we're going to take a look at is actually going to be Shine Greymon. Now this is a pretty standard variant of the list or the lineup. So you see all the newer release Agumon here. The BT13 Agumon is insane, allowing you to just play a Marcus at any time during your turn, once per turn, for free. Fantastic effect, and this guy is definitely stepped on as a good card. Outside of that, we've got both the Yugioh Greymons. The new Yugioh Greymon allows you to pull from your security a Marcus Tamer, just play it for free, which is insane value, especially considering this guy has only 2 costs coming from one of the red-yellow Agumons. Outside of that, we do see for the level 5s, the Rise Greymons, the older one in BT12, as well as the one from BT13. Both of these guys, really similar effects. I've seen some folks run the Rise Greymon X Antibody alongside the new BT13 Rise Greymon, but I think both of these work just as well. What's really fantastic about both of them is that they also give you the ability to recover using your Marcus Tamer. So if your Marcus Tamer swings an opponent's security or Digimon and is destroyed, then you can use it and recover, and then of course when it's checked, it's going to come back to the field. And then outside of that, of course, we've got the BT12 Shine Greymons to buff up all of your Marcus Tamers, as well as reduce the power of all your opponent's security. And then the creme de la creme, the piece de resistance for this deck, definitely the Shine Greymon Burst Mode. Now the Burst Mode Digimon have this interesting effect where if you have a Tamer on the board of a specific name, you can pull that Tamer back to your hand and then Digivolve for free just for 1 turn. Now, most of the other decks work that way. The Ravemon Burst Mode, the Rosemon Burst Mode, they all work similarly to that. However, the Marcus deck has this neat little cheat code where they can use the 4-cost Marcus to attack, and then he allows you to Digivolve one of your Digimon for free. And because of that, this 5-cost Digivolution cost becomes 0. Whereas the burst mode cost is 0 itself, but you lose Digimon at the end of the turn. This way, you get to keep your Shine Greymon burst mode every single turn and keep its effect over and over and over, who is then in turn going to allow your Marcus Tamers to melt opponent's security whenever they're even rested. And then finally, topping all this off, you see the 4 copies of the new Marcus Tamer, who has an incredible ability that's flexible not only in this deck, but another deck we'll take a look at very soon. And that when he comes into the field, he can be rested. You can choose to do that, and if you do, one of your opponent's Digimon gets minus 3,000, and if you have a Greymon or Agumon named Digimon on the field, then you just gain a memory back. So with a deck that has heal, power-ups, DP reduction, and reduced cost Digivolves, it's no wonder this deck is very strong. The next deck we're going to take a look at is one that I definitely slept on, but please heed my advice. Do not be like me. Don't sleep on Royal Knights. Now, I know this deck is a little expensive to build, requiring 3 to 4 copies of each of the Secret Raiders from this set, but it is well worth it. While this deck does have a couple of counters, I think the inclusion of the Marcus Tamer is probably one of the smartest choices I've seen so far in this deck to get around those really pesky Digimon that stop you from reducing your play costs. Of course, this is because, like I said before, Marcus does come into play and he allows you to rest him, and when he's rested, you can give one of your opponent's Digimon minus 3k. And it just so happens that all of those really pesky Floodgate Digimon happen to be 3k or less, and so he finds a perfect spot in this deck as a 2-of. While I think a lot of folks' splits will differ as far as what they're deciding to focus on for the 2-ofs, the 3-ofs, and the 4-ofs of the deck, I think some of the basic staples that you guys watching should take away from this is that cards like the Vmon here, the Magnamon, excuse me, as well as the Dynasmon, the Omegamon, and the Dukemon are all and should all be 4-ofs in the deck. Outside of that, you also want to have 4 copies of the Omegamon, as well as, of course, the Yggdrasil super rare for the deck, being able to reduce the play costs of your Royal Knights every single turn. And then finally, the option card for the Royal Knights deck, definitely want to have 4 copies of this as well, allowing you to slot cards up under it, as well as play Digimon from your Yggdrasil sources for a single turn. You'll notice that this deck does run a couple of the Sistermons. Now, I've seen a lot of folks run the Sistermon Blanc here that allows you to discard 1 card and then draw 2. But I personally like the other Sistermon Blanc as well, being able to only allow you to draw 1, but it gives you a blocker on the field. And this deck, in the mid game, it's really tough to find some of those pieces that allow you to destroy your opponent's Digimon to keep their board nice and tidy. And so this Sistermon, while providing some card draw while you have a Royal Knights on the board, does give you a little bit more protection that you may need. Outside of that, we see some of the other Knights like Craniumon, the Alphamon, which are all great choices. The Slipmon, or the Kintarosmon, which allows you to recover a little bit if you have another yellow card in your hand. And with the inclusion of the Magnamon in this deck, you have a couple of choices there, as well as the Dophnomon to help you accelerate your gameplay a little bit faster. All of these cards come together very nicely to form one of the most powerful Megazoo decks the game has ever seen, so going forward in BT13, you definitely want to keep your eye on this deck and how it evolves. So the last deck we're going to take a look at today is going to be Belphemon that we talked about before. This deck actually won at a 3-on-3 team tournament. I think there were about 25 teams in total. And I love the dig here. The player who won this deck's name is Nabe. He's like, look, if this deck wins, like his friend's tier list, he's got to raise his deck on his friend's tier list. So I'm sure that whoever his friend is now is definitely going to be keeping an eye on this deck, and I hope you guys are as well. Right off the bat, we see 3 copies of the Psychemon, because you don't want to fight Royal Knights without one of these bad boys, especially if you're running a purple deck. Outside of that, we just see a ton of Cycle cards in things like the Vascomons, the Proto-Gizamon, the Gizamon AT, the Gizamon XT, and then the Asmon, which basically lets you get to your Belphemon for free. We also see the inclusion of the Eismon brothers, of course, Scatter Mode, as well as just the regular Eismon, because this deck does cycle from hand so quickly. It's just nice to have that level 4 on the field with the Eismon, right? Of course, we do see the inclusion of both the stars of the deck, the Belphemon Rage Mode and the Sleep Mode. The Belphemon Rage Mode being able to swing for tons of security in a single turn, and has the ability to clear all level 5s off the board, which basically wipes all the blockers that you would probably ever see, outside of maybe Royal Knights. But what's even better than that is the option card that he has access to, again, kind of cheap at 6 cost, allows you to pop a level 6 or higher. So you've got pretty much the entire spectrum covered with just these 2 cards. What I do love, though, is that this player, Nabe, decided to include 2 copies of the Megadeo Flare. Because this deck has the ability to pop a Gizamon and then play another Gizamon from the trash, potentially, the Megadeo Flare allows you to basically pop a level 6 for even cheaper than the 6 cost option card would. And then finally, if you're actually having trouble getting to your Astamon or finding your Astamon in the deck to Digivolve into one of your Belphemons, then the Akihiro Kurata Tamer here just is the perfect fill-in card, because if you can get to your 9-cost Gizamon XT, then you can use your Akihiro Kurata Tamer, sacrifice it and the Gizamon, and then just play a Belphemon for minus the play cost of the Digimon XT here, which is 9. So that essentially gives you a 2-cost Belphemon Sleep Mode. I said it before on Twitter actually before doing this video, but I think that BT13 purple players are eating well. And with decks like Belphemon that are like this well oiled and this smooth, it's pretty obvious why that's the case. Alright folks, well that's going to pretty much do it for me today. Again, BT13, pretty much every deck that you could even imagine has gotten support, and I'm glad to see that lots of decks are doing so well. Hopefully we can find some more counters to Shine Greymon. I think Royal Knights has some counters in things like Belphemon, which again, we'll probably see a lot more play in the future as well, considering its results thus far. But if you folks have any questions about some of the decks that you've seen here today, or some of the decks that you didn't see here today that you thought you would see, let me know those in the comments below. I'm always answering, always reading your guys' comments. Thanks for all the love so far. Anyway, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Do me a favor before you get out of here, hit the subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.